Hey World Civilizations, Mr. Lassiter with you, and in today's video we're going to be looking at the failures of the League of Nations. Yes, that League of Nations, and the start of World War II, mainly looking at two aggressors here, Adolf Hitler in Germany, and then also we'll be looking at the aggression of Japan in the Pacific. So let's take a look at our video goals. Specifically, what actions does Adolf Hitler take that lead to World War II? What is appeasement, and how does that relate to the start of World War II in Europe? And then why did the rest of the world fail to prevent this war from coming on, even though they could kind of see it coming on down the line? So let's go ahead and get started with this. First of all, let's remember what the League of Nations was. It was an association of countries established in 1919 by the Treaty of Versailles. It was proposed by Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, and the United States does not join this league. It did not want to be caught up in an alliance system. And basically, when this league is needed most, it is almost powerless to do anything. And we're going to look at some of those reasons again. So we want to kind of predict, and you should be able to do this, what might be some of the consequences of the United States not being involved in this League of Nations. This is something we've looked at before, so keep on thinking about this. It's a great political cartoon that we've seen before as well. This idea the United States designs this so-called League of Nations bridge, but being the keystone in it, does not join, so therefore it remains fairly weak. So the League starts to decline, and we're going to look at some of the events that would lead to the breakup of the League of Nations and the beginning of the war. So let's start with Japan, actually. In 1931, Japan is badly hit by economic depression, just like we see in the rest of the world. People begin to lose faith in their government. They begin looking more to the army for help. And soon after an incident in Manchuria that was most likely set up by the Japanese military themselves, an explosion on a railway, Japan uses this as an example to invade Manchuria and take it over. Now, this is an invasion of another country, of course, China, where other European countries had interests. And so the League of Nations reacts. And how do they react? Well, they tell Japan not to do it. And then Japan does it anyways. And they tell other countries, don't trade with Japan. But keep in mind, we're in the beginning of the Great Depression here, so many countries in the world are poor and they need Japan to trade with. And so, of course, they continue to trade with Japan. So what does the League of Nations do next? They condemn Japan for its actions. How dare you, invade this sovereign land? And so what does Japan do in response? Well, they simply decide, because there are no punishments, no penalties, no consequences for doing it, they decide to up and leave the League of Nations. So Japan exits, and the League of Nations continues to grow weaker. So think about this. How might Japan's actions encourage other nations to do similar things? Now, Mr. Guilford talked a lot with you about Hitler's rise to power. In January of 1933, Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany, and when he becomes Chancellor, he basically exits the League of Nations. By 1935, he's built up an army, and in 1936, he orders that army to invade the Rhineland. And the Rhineland was the demilitarized zone, if you follow my mouse here, between Germany and France. And so Hitler is going to take the aggressive action of actually putting his army into that region, which had been demilitarized since the beginning of since the end of World War I. In 1936, he's going to begin making alliances. He allies with Japan and also with Italy. And you can see here a propaganda postcard celebrating this alliance between the Chancellor of Germany, the fascist dictator of Italy, and the military leader of Japan. In 1938, also, Hitler takes back Austria. Austria there is in purple. And of course, it had lost its alliance with that in the Treaty of Versailles. And so Hitler is going to kind of continue to add on to what is becoming a growing Germany. Now, how do people respond? Well, they basically respond with a practice of appeasement. Britain and France are both opposed to Hitler's moves. They violate the Treaty of Versailles. But France and Britain also remember what happened 20 years before, and they're scared of another war. So they practice this policy of appeasement. And that is a policy of giving into the demands of an aggressive nation in hopes of avoiding war and keeping peace. And so even though Hitler was taking aggressive actions, Britain and France thought if they gave him what he wanted, it would actually keep peace in the long run. That they would not have to go to war with Adolf Hitler. And here in this image, actually, you see the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, actually meeting with Hitler in 1938, just barely a year, a little more than a year before the war begins. But aggressive nations don't always stop being aggressive. And so Hitler is going to continue this aggressive maneuvering. In 1938, Hitler demands and is given, through this policy of appeasement, the Sudetenland. And in 1939, he invades Czechoslovakia and adds it to his growing empire. And in early 1939, kind of seeing what's coming, he makes an alliance with the Soviet Union in order to try to avoid any possible war in the East. What Hitler is doing is preparing to invade Poland. And here's a good political cartoon showing Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia in this together against Poland. So what happens with Poland? Well, on September 1st, 1939, the German army invades Poland and quickly takes control. This was going to be kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. Great Britain and France give in to Germany's taking of the Rhineland. They give in to the taking of Austria. They give in to the taking of Czechoslovakia. But they are finding out that their policy of appeasement is not stopping Hitler's aggression, and instead he's going to continue. So on September 3rd, 2 days later, Britain and France finally are forced to declare war on Germany. They don't want to fight another world war, but this policy of appeasement had not worked. The League of Nations was not able to intervene. Plus, they had already promised Poland that they would help if Poland was invaded. And so, beginning September 3rd, 1939, we're going to see World War II begin. So let's think to ourselves, why couldn't the League of Nations stop Hitler? Well, keep in mind, it had no army to enforce anything. Germany, Japan, Italy, they expand without any way for the League of Nations to stop it. Europe also didn't want another war. Countries like Britain and France were still hurting. And many countries, of course, like the United States, just simply don't belong to it. And then on top of that, it only met 4 times a year. So think about this. If your school's administration or teachers only meet 4 times a year, would enough get done to prepare for each school year or to probably prevent conflicts within school? Certainly not. That's all for today. Here are your video goals. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at we're going to be looking more intensely at Hitler's aggression through newspaper headlines. So hopefully you will enjoy that. Everybody have a good